Owen Elridge hadn't planned on crying in the front seat of his rusted pickup truck. But when the daycare assistant handed him a pink construction paper bill with a red past due stamp on it, something inside him cracked. He wiped his face quickly with the sleeve of his worn hoodie before turning around to see his 5-year-old daughter, Tessa, beaming up at him from the back seat. "Daddy, I made a birdhouse today, with real glue." "That's amazing, Tess," he said, forcing a smile as he started the truck. It coughed like it didn't want to help him today either. Can't wait to see it. He'd worked 3 double shifts this week at the mechanic shop, surviving on gas station coffee and whatever leftovers his buddy Marco tossed him from the diner at closing. And still, he was 2 months behind on daycare payments. The rent was even worse. He didn't have family left, just Tessa. And he was doing everything he could to make sure she never felt how hard life had gotten. "Mr. Elridge," Owen turned at the sound of the voice as he was buckling Tessa in. A woman in a navy sweater and jeans was standing near the gate, holding a small tote bag with a glittery unicorn keychain dangling from the zipper. "Yes," he asked, cautious but polite. "I'm volunteering for the spring fair. I noticed your daughter's project. Tessa, right?" Tessa lit up. "That's me. I'm Vivienne," the woman said, crouching down so she was eye level with Tessa. "That birdhouse is the best thing I've seen all day." Vivienne Penrose had warm brown eyes and a voice that made people lean in without realizing they were doing it. She was soft-spoken but confident, and she didn't seem to blink at the fact that Owen looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Thanks," Owen said as she stood. "She's got a wild imagination, I can tell," Vivienne said. "Are you two coming to the fair this Friday?" Owen hesitated. Tickets cost $10. He'd already stretched a loaf of bread over 5 days. "We'll see," he said. "Depends on work." Vivienne nodded, but there was something unreadable in her expression. "Well, if you do come, I'll be running the bake sale booth. Stop by." She walked away with that kind of grace that didn't seem practiced, just natural. Tessa waved frantically through the window until Vivienne disappeared inside. "Daddy," Tessa said once they were on the road. She smelled like cookies. Owen laughed despite the weight pressing on his chest. Maybe she's made of cookies. By Friday, Owen had finally scraped together enough from tips to take Tessa. He skipped lunch all week to do it. She'd been talking about the fair nonstop, and he couldn't bear to let her miss out. The fairgrounds looked like something out of a movie: colorful banners, popcorn carts, a petting zoo, and rows of booths manned by smiling parents. He felt like an imposter in his faded jeans and boots, but Tessa was already tugging his hand toward the bounce house. He spotted Vivienne almost instantly. She was behind a booth with a checkered tablecloth and towering stacks of cookies and cupcakes. Her hair was swept into a loose braid, and she was laughing with another parent. When she saw Owen, her face lit up. "You made it," she said brightly. Tessa wouldn't stop talking about it, he said. "I brought extra chocolate chip," she said. "Want one?" He hesitated, then nodded. She handed him a cookie wrapped in wax paper. "On the house." He took a bite. It was warm, soft, better than anything he'd tasted in months. "Wow," she smiled. "I'm glad you think so." "Tessa, do you want to decorate a cupcake?" Vivienne had a setup with icing tubes and sprinkles in every color imaginable. Tessa dove in, chatting away like she'd known Vivienne forever. Owen stood nearby, watching them. Vivienne was so natural with her, listening, laughing, kneeling to her level. "She likes you," Owen said quietly once Tessa ran off to show her cupcake to a classmate. "I like her too," Vivienne said. Then she looked at him. "And you," he blinked. "Me, you're a good dad." He didn't know how to respond to that. No one had ever said it to him before, not once. "I'm just trying to keep her happy." "You're doing a lot more than that." He looked down, unsure what to say. But something shifted in the air between them, something warm, something new. They started seeing each other more after that. It was casual at first. She'd offer to walk with them after school pick-up. Sometimes she'd bring a little snack for Tessa or a coffee for Owen. She never made it feel like charity. It just felt easy. One afternoon, after Tessa ran ahead to chase a squirrel, Owen found himself standing beside Vivienne on the sidewalk. "You're not like the other moms," he said. "I'm not a mom," she said with a small laugh. "No kids, just me." He glanced at her. "You don't have to volunteer at school, but you do." "Why?" She hesitated. "Because I have time, and because I like being around people who are real." he frowned. What does that mean? She looked at him. It means, you don't pretend, you love your daughter and you're honest about how hard things are. That's rare. He didn't know what to say to that, but her hand brushed against his just barely, and he didn't pull away. Later that week, she offered to drive them home after Tessa tripped and scraped her knee at school. I live close, she said. It's no problem. The car was sleek. Too sleek. Black leather interior, the kind of vehicle that didn't belong in his neighborhood. He noticed the designer bag in the backseat, the subtle gold watch on her wrist. He tried to push the thoughts away. Maybe she was just someone who did well. Maybe she had a high-paying job. He didn't want to make assumptions. But when she pulled up to an apartment building, no, not an apartment, a full townhouse tucked behind a gate with a coded entry, he stared. Wait, he said. This is your place, she nodded. Want to come in? I have ice packs and enough band-aids to patch a pirate ship. He hesitated. But Tessa was already halfway up the walk, talking about the squirrel she saw earlier. He followed. Inside, it was even more impressive. Marble countertops, art that looked like it belonged in a gallery, a piano in the corner, and the view floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city skyline. You're doing well, he said slowly. She gave a small shrug. I've been lucky. Lucky how? She looked at him for a long moment. I own a few companies. My family was in finance. I inherited a lot, but I built more, he blinked. You're rich. I'm a billionaire, she said, not proudly, just honestly. He stared at her. Why didn't you say something? Because I didn't want it to change how you saw me, he shook his head. Vivienne, I'm a guy who's been duct taping his shoes for the past 2 months. We're not even in the same universe, she stepped closer. But we're standing in the same room. He didn't know what to say. But then Tessa called from the kitchen asking for juice, and Vivienne smiled and went to help her. And Owen just stood there, heart thudding, wondering how the hell he'd ended up here with a billionaire who smelled like cookies and looked at him like he was worth something. The knock on Owen's apartment door came just after 8 on a Thursday evening, just as he'd finished folding the last of Tessa's tiny socks. He cracked the door open cautiously, unsure who would be visiting this late. Vivienne stood there holding a paper bag and a puzzled expression. I brought soup, she said. I figured you hadn't eaten, he blinked. How'd you know where I live? I asked the school secretary. I told her I was worried about Tessa's knee, which was true. He stepped aside without thinking. Come in. She took in the small apartment with a glance that didn't linger. The overhead light flickered slightly, and there were crayon scrawls on the wall near the kitchen. She didn't mention either. Instead, she placed the bag on the counter and pulled out 2 containers and a warm baguette wrapped in linen. Smells amazing, he said, watching her set the table like she'd done it 100 times before. It's mushroom bisque, she said. From a chef I know. He moved toward the fridge. I've got some root beer or tap water, she smiled. Root beer sounds perfect. As she poured 2 mismatched glasses, he noticed Tessa peering from her bedroom doorway, holding her stuffed rabbit by one ear. Vivienne knelt, resting her chin on her hand. Want to try a fancy soup with me? Tessa nodded slowly and padded out in princess pajamas. Owen pulled up a 3rd chair. Dinner was quiet at first. Tessa dipped her bread in the soup with intense concentration, and Vivienne watched her like she was memorizing every movement. Do you always do this? Owen asked once Tessa wandered off to build a fort from couch cushions. Show up with food, she asked. Yeah, for people who don't ask, she looked at him. Only when I really want to see them again. He glanced down at his bowl. You could have any guy you wanted. Probably someone who doesn't live above a laundromat. I don't want any guy. I want someone who doesn't care what I'm worth. I didn't say I didn't care, but you haven't asked for anything. He met her eyes. That's not who I am. She leaned back slightly, studying him. No. It isn't. After she helped rinse the bowls, she didn't rush to leave. Instead, she sat on the floor beside Tessa's fort, letting the little girl pile stuffed animals on her lap like offerings. Owen watched from the kitchen, arms crossed, trying to make sense of the contrast between this woman and the world she came from. When Tessa finally dozed off mid-sentence, her rabbit clutched tight. He carried her to bed and covered her with the softest quilt they owned. When he returned to the living room, Vivienne was sipping her root beer, her legs stretched out in front of her, shoes off. You're dangerous, he said, sitting down beside her. Why? Because you're making me forget how impossible this is. She turned toward him. It's not impossible, he shook his head. You don't get it. I've got overdue bills stacked like bricks in a wall I can't climb. My truck barely runs. I can't take you to dinner or buy you expensive things. Hell, I can't even promise I won't cancel plans because of a blown tire. I'm not here for dinner reservations, Owen. Then why are you here? She hesitated, then leaned in, her voice low. Because I've spent a long time around people who only speak in numbers. And you're the first person in years who makes me feel like I can breathe. He didn't kiss her. He wanted to, but something about the moment felt too fragile to touch, so he just nodded and they sat in silence until she finally stood to leave. I'll walk you down, he said. She stopped at the door. You don't have to. I want to. Outside, the air was crisp and smelled faintly of rain. Her car, a sleek silver coupe that looked wildly out of place next to the rusted sedans along the curb, waited under the streetlight. She paused before opening the door. I know this feels like two worlds colliding, she said, but I'm not scared of yours. I'm scared of yours, he admitted. She nodded. Then we'll take it slow. She got in and drove off, and Owen stood on the curb for a long time, hands in his pockets, wondering when his life had started changing without him even noticing. The next morning, there was a brown envelope taped to his door. Inside were Tessa's daycare fees paid in full. No note, just a small card with a drawing Tessa had done of her, Vivienne, and him at the fair, all holding balloons. He stared at it for a long time, then tucked it into his jacket. When he picked up Tessa later, he didn't mention it. But he did ask if she wanted to stop by the park, just the three of them. Vivienne met them there, sitting on a bench with a scarf wrapped loosely around her neck. She stood when she saw them, and Tessa ran ahead, arms wide. I didn't pay the daycare, she said quietly when Owen reached her. It was my assistant. She overheard me talking about it and took initiative. He raised an eyebrow. You're saying a billionaire's assistant accidentally paid off my childcare debt. Not accidentally, she said, but not without me knowing either. He looked away, jaw tight. I don't need charity. I didn't do it out of pity. Then why? Because I care about your daughter, and I care about you, and because I can. He didn't respond, not at first. Then he sat down beside her, arms resting on his knees. I'm not used to people doing things for me. I know. And I'm not used to people fighting so hard to stay proud. Is that a bad thing? No, it just means I have to find the right way to love you. He turned to her slowly. Is that what this is? Not yet, she said. But I want it to be. Tessa screamed with joy from the swings, and Owen closed his eyes for a second, letting the sound settle something in him. Then he looked at Vivienne and said, I don't know how to be in your world. Then let me come into yours. They sat side by side again, saying nothing more, but something had shifted. Not a promise, not yet, but something just as powerful and understanding. Vivienne didn't call for 3 days. Not because she didn't want to, but because something in Owen's face at the park made her pause. He hadn't rejected her, not exactly, but he hadn't reached for her either, so she waited. On the 4th day, she showed up again this time, not with soup or surprises, just a quiet knock at the shop where Owen worked. He looked up from beneath the hood of a sedan, grease streaking his forearm, a wrench in one hand. The garage smelled like oil and burnt rubber, filled with the heavy rhythm of machinery and muffled rock music from a dusty radio. Vivienne stood in the doorway in jeans and a plain black windbreaker, her hair pulled back tightly, no makeup, no earrings. She didn't look like a billionaire. She looked like someone who didn't want to be noticed. Owen wiped his hands on a rag and walked over. You shouldn't be here, he said, not coldly, but with the kind of weariness that no sleep could fix. I didn't come to cause trouble, she said. I just wanted to ask if you'd come to something. He didn't answer right away, so she added, It's not fancy, and it's not about me. What is it? She pulled a folded flyer from her back pocket and held it out. The page was creased and damp at the corners. It read, Community garden build Saturday morning volunteers needed. You want me to dig dirt? He asked. I want you to help kids plant something they'll take care of, she said. Tessa's class will be there. They are each getting their own plot. He studied her for a second, then took the flyer. I'll think about it. She nodded and left without asking for more. That Saturday, Owen stood in the middle of a fenced-off patch of land behind the elementary school. He was wearing an old t-shirt and work boots, and Tessa clung to his side, holding a tiny trowel like it was a sword. Vivienne was already there, kneeling next to a flower bed wearing gloves and guiding a boy through planting his seeds. She glanced up and caught Owen's eye, her face unreadable. Then she turned back to the boy and said something that made him laugh. Tessa tugged Owen's hand. "Can we do the carrots next?" "Yeah, kiddo, let's find your spot." They worked for over an hour. Tessa planted crooked rows of lettuce and cucumbers, occasionally asking for help and then deciding she didn't need it. Owen stayed quiet, his focus split between her and Vivienne. Eventually, Vivienne wandered over and knelt beside Tessa. "You've got a good eye for garden design," she said. "I'm going to grow the biggest vegetables," Tessa declared, "and sell them, like a store." Vivienne reached out and pressed a small garden marker into the soil beside the cucumber seeds. "Then you'll need a name," Tessa thought for a second. "Tessa's Super Garden," Vivienne smiled. "Perfect." Owen stood, brushing dirt off his hands. "She'll forget about it in 2 days." "No," Vivienne said, looking up at him. "She won't." He hesitated, then offered her his hand. She took it and let him pull her up. "I was wrong," he said, "about the garden, about thinking we couldn't fit in each other's lives." She didn't answer, just watched him. "I don't have anything to give you, Vivienne, but I want to be around you." "If that still means something." "It means everything," she said. That night, she invited them both to dinner, not at a restaurant, but at her place. She insisted on cooking herself something simple. Tessa brought her drawing pad and spent most of the evening sketching plants, while Owen leaned against the counter, watching Vivienne move around the kitchen like it didn't belong to her. "I don't use this place much," she admitted. "Too big? Why'd you buy it?" "I thought I was supposed to." He nodded. They sat down to eat pasta, roasted vegetables, and warm bread. No wine, no formalities, just food between 3 people who were slowly becoming something more. Later, while Tessa lay curled up on the couch with a blanket and a coloring book, Owen leaned toward Vivienne at the table. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When we first met, did you already know you liked me?" "I didn't know anything then," she said. "I just knew you looked like someone who never stopped trying." He looked down, then back at her. "I still don't know how this works. It doesn't have to make sense to anyone else, just us." There was a long pause. "My lease is almost up," Owen said, "and the building's being sold. They're raising rent." She didn't flinch. "What do you need?" "Not money," he said quickly. "Just time to figure out where to go." "Come here," she said. He looked at her sharply. "What?" "There's a guest suite downstairs with its own entrance. You'd have privacy." "I'm not asking you to move in with me. I'm offering you space." "And what about Tessa?" "She'd have a yard. And a garden." He didn't answer, but his eyes flicked toward the couch where Tessa had fallen asleep coloring a tomato with a bright blue crayon. Vivienne stood and walked to a cabinet. She returned with a key and placed it on the table in front of him. "No pressure," she said. "Just a door if you want it." He picked up the key and turned it in his fingers. "Why are you doing this for me?" "I'm not," she said. "I'm doing it for us." He looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't feel like he was standing in someone else's house. He felt like he was being invited into something real. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "I'm scared," he said. "Me too," she whispered. But neither of them let go. The first morning in the guest suite felt like stepping into someone else's life. Owen stood barefoot on the polished wood floors, watching steam rise from a ceramic mug Vivienne had left on the counter before heading to a meeting. Tessa was still asleep in the small bedroom down the hall, curled up in blankets that smelled faintly of lavender. The place was quiet, too quiet for someone used to neighbors arguing through paper-thin walls and trucks rumbling past his window. He turned the mug in his hands and caught sight of a note beside it. "A simple folded piece of paper. Thought you might like tea instead of coffee today. There's fresh fruit in the fridge." He stared at the handwriting for a moment, then tucked the note into the back pocket of his jeans and walked to the window. The garden below was still damp with morning dew. Tessa's cucumber plot had already started to sprout. Later that week, Vivienne invited him to a formal dinner. Not a date, not really just an event she was hosting for one of her nonprofit initiatives, children's literacy. He almost said no, but she didn't pressure him. She just offered a navy suit laid out on the guest bed, tags still on, and said, "If you want to, I'd like you there." He'd never worn a suit that fit before. It was tailored to his shoulders, the fabric smooth and clean, the tie already knotted. When he stepped out into the main house, Vivienne was waiting at the base of the stairs in a sharply cut black dress, her hair pinned up, diamond studs catching the light. "You look." He started, then shook his head with a laugh. "There's no word for it." She stepped forward and adjusted his collar. "You're not so bad yourself. I feel like I'm pretending to be someone else." "No," she said, "you're just seeing a different version of yourself." They arrived at the venue in a car with doors that closed silently. The gala was held in a glass-walled building overlooking the bay, the skyline glittering behind swaying chandeliers. Waiters offered flutes of champagne, and guests floated through the crowd in gowns that probably cost more than his truck had when it was new. He kept his hand tucked in his pocket, resisting the urge to fix his tie again. Vivienne stayed close, introducing him where it made sense, never pushing, always watching. At one point, she leaned in and whispered, "If this gets overwhelming, just say the word and I'll pull the fire alarm." He gave a quiet laugh and shook his head. "I'm good. You didn't tell me you were funding the whole thing. It's not about that. It's about the kids." The keynote speaker was a woman who'd grown up in foster care and published her first novel at 23 with help from one of Vivienne's programs. Owen listened to her story, not as a guest, but as someone who understood what it meant to survive. After the applause died down, he turned to Vivienne. "You don't just throw money at things, you're in it. I don't like staying on the sidelines. I'm starting to see that." On the way home, she rested her hand on his knee, her fingers warm through the fabric. He didn't speak, neither did she. The silence between them had shifted from uncertain to comfortable, full of things they didn't have to say out loud anymore. That night, after Tessa was asleep and the dishes were done, he found Vivienne in the garden, barefoot, her heels abandoned on the grass. She was walking the rows slowly, watering a few dry spots, the moonlight caught in her hair. "Hey," he said softly. She looked up, startled. "Did I wake you?" "No, couldn't sleep." She held out the watering can. "Want a turn?" He took it, surprised at how heavy it was. Together they moved down the rows, not speaking. When they reached Tessa's corner, he paused. "She told me today she wants to be a chef," he said. "She made a sandwich with jelly, turkey, and pickles." Vivienne laughed quietly. "Ambitious." "Yeah, she said it tasted like adventure." "Sounds like her." He set the watering can down and turned toward her. "There's something I need to ask." "Okay." "This," he gestured between them. "What are we doing?" She didn't hesitate. "Whatever you're ready for." "I want to give you more than this," he said. "More than what I can offer right now. You already have. I mean it. I want to show up for you the way you've shown up for me." She stepped closer. "Then do it," he blinked. "Do what?" "Stay," she said. "Not just here, with me, Tessa too. Let's figure it out together. I've never lived with anyone before, not like this. Neither have I. You've had options. I've never had you." He didn't answer, just wrapped his arms around her waist and pulled her close. She rested her forehead against his, and they stood there, breathing the same air, the garden around them damp and alive. Weeks passed. Quietly, steadily, things changed. Tessa started kindergarten. Vivienne showed up to parent night meetings with a color-coded binder and homemade cookies. Owen found work with a custom auto shop across town, one that paid better and offered benefits. He fixed up his truck with his own hands, not because he had to, but because it felt good to make something run again. They didn't move into the main house. Not yet. The guest suite suited them just fine. Vivienne made it theirs, not with expensive furniture but with framed drawings from Tessa, a shared calendar, and a shelf of thrift store cookbooks they picked out together. One evening in late autumn, Owen found her on the rooftop terrace that overlooked the city. She was bundled in a sweater, her bare feet tucked under her, sipping cider from a chipped mug. He stepped out and handed her a box. She looked up. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was a tiny gold ring, not a diamond, just a delicate band with a small emerald, Tessa's birthstone. "I can't compete with everything you have," he said, "but I can promise I'll never pretend with you, I'll never disappear, and I'll love you the way you deserve." She held the ring between her fingers, her eyes glassy. "You're not competing," she whispered. "You're winning." I'm asking you to marry me, Vivienne, not because I need saving, but because you make everything feel possible. She didn't cry, she didn't laugh, she just stood, reached up, and kissed him like she already knew the answer. Yes, she said against his mouth. 1,000 times yes. They didn't throw a gala wedding. Instead, they got married in the garden, under string lights and a sky full of stars, with Tessa tossing petals from a basket that matched her blue boots. Vivienne wore a simple white dress. Owen wore the same suit from the gala. Marco from the diner catered sandwiches. The school principal cried during the vows. And when Vivienne promised to love both of them for all the days of her life, even the ones filled with jelly pickle sandwiches, Owen knew he'd found everything he never thought he deserved, not a rescue, a home. The first snowfall came early that year, blanketing the city in a quiet hush that made everything feel softer, closer. Owen stood by the window of the guest suite, watching Tessa chase flakes in the backyard as Vivienne helped her roll the beginning of a snowman. Her laughter carried through the glass like music he hadn't known he'd missed. He didn't move to open the door. He just watched them, heart full and still adjusting to the idea that this life, the one he never imagined having, was truly his now. Behind him, the room was cluttered with small signs of permanence. Tessa's backpack hung on a hook beside his tool belt. A calendar marked with school events and work rotations hung crooked on the fridge. On the counter, an open envelope bore the header of a local foundation, Vivienne's name printed beside his under community partners. She'd invited him to join the board a month ago, not out of obligation, but because she wanted him there. The foundation was launching a new initiative, vocational programs for single parents, and she insisted his voice mattered. He hadn't answered her yet. That afternoon, while Tessa napped under a fleece blanket still dusted with snow, Owen stepped into the main kitchen where Vivienne was pouring hot chocolate into 2 mugs. She looked up, her cheeks still pink from the cold. "You didn't come out." "I wanted to watch," he said. "It was." "Good." She handed him a mug, her fingers brushing his. "You've been quiet lately, thinking about." He set the mug down and leaned against the counter. "I've been trying to picture what life looks like 5 years from now, 10, and I keep seeing the same thing." "What's that?" "You, her." "A house that smells like cookies and motor oil. Maybe a dog that barks too much, and me doing something that matters." She waited, letting him speak. "I want to help with the program," he said. "The board, the classes, all of it." "I've been where they are." Vivienne smiled, but it wasn't the soft kind. It was proud, grounded, like she'd known he'd arrive here all on his own. "I hoped you'd say that," she said. He stepped closer. "But I need one thing." "Name it." "No more guest suite," he said. "No more separate space. I want us to live in the same home." Her breath caught, but she recovered quickly. "You sure?" "I'm more than sure. I want to wake up next to you, make her breakfast together, fight over the thermostat, and trip over the same laundry basket." She nodded slowly. "Then let's do it." They moved into the main house that weekend. Not with hired movers or neatly labeled boxes, but with laughter and mess, and a lot of help from Tessa, who insisted her stuffed animals each needed a dedicated seat in the living room. Vivienne cleared out her office to make a room for Owen's books and work table. He built a bookshelf with his own hands, staining the wood dark and strong. When he presented it to her, she ran her hand along the grain and whispered, "You made a home for me." The city thawed slowly into spring. The garden bloomed early, and Tessa's cucumbers took over 2 full rows. They spent weekends teaching community workshops, everything from basic car maintenance to budgeting. Vivienne handled the logistics, Owen taught the lessons, and Tessa passed out snacks like she was running a gourmet booth. One evening, Owen found Vivienne sitting on the back porch with a notebook in her lap. She was scribbling something furiously, her brow furrowed. "What are you working on?" he asked. "An idea," she said. "A community center with classrooms, childcare, maybe even a clinic. I want to use the property on 9th Street. He sat beside her. "That's ambitious." So was falling in love with a mechanic. He rested his hand on her knee. "You didn't fall in love with a mechanic. You fell in love with a man who wasn't afraid to start over." She closed the notebook and leaned her head on his shoulder. "I fell in love with the man who made me want a life I'd never dared to imagine." That summer, they hosted a neighborhood block party in the garden. Tessa wore a chef's hat. and served cucumber sandwiches with wild pride. Owen grilled on a new set. Vivienne had surprised him with engraved with his initials, and Vivienne organized a donation drive that raised enough to fund the first 6 months of the new center. After the crowd thinned and the sun fell below the rooftops, they sat on the porch swing with Tessa asleep across both their laps. Fireflies blinked lazily in the bushes. "I never thought I'd have this," Owen said. Vivienne traced circles on his wrist. "You always did. You just didn't know how to reach it. I do now. I know." They didn't speak for a while, just breathed together, the kind of silence that held everything inside it. The wedding ring still sat snug on Vivienne's finger, glinting in the porch light. Owen kissed it, then her cheek, and finally her lips slow, certain, like he was anchoring himself to something unshakable. That night, when they carried Tessa to bed and tucked her in, Owen paused at the door and looked back into the room. Toys scattered on the rug, stars glowing on the ceiling, and the soft sound of her breathing. Vivienne slid her arm around his waist. "Ready for tomorrow?" she asked. "With you," he said. "Always." Years later, the plaque outside the community center would read, "Built by hands, hearts, and hope." Dedicated to second chances. But inside their home, tucked between old sketches and garden photos, was the note she'd once left by a mug of tea, faded but legible. Proof that love didn't have to begin in perfect places, it just had to be real, and theirs was, every day, forever.